Well, hi everyone again, and welcome to perhaps one of the most exciting webinars that we've done here at PNOE. For those of you who don't know me, I am Panos. I'm one of the two co-founders of PNOE, and today I'm super excited and honored to be having Dr. Shallenberger, Frank Shallenberger, in today's webinar. Dr. Shallenberger has been one of the fundamental people behind breath analysis and cardiometabolic testing, in the sense that his work has been instrumental in actually making real value and making good use of the entire data set that cardiometabolic analysis provides us. He's been in the space, I believe since before I was born. So, I can't really, talk enough about his experience and his contribution to the space. He will obviously take up most of this conversation and the presentation that we're going to be doing here today. But I just wanted to extend this very warm welcome to Dr. Frank Shallenberger. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I also want to say that, Dr. Shallenberger joining us here is not just about discussing breath analysis in general. It's also about announcing and making public the partnership that we've established with him in multiple directions, with the most important one being the incorporation of his teachings and his methodology into our reporting. As many of you already know, Dr. Shallenberger has been able to codify, in lack of a better term, his methodology, rationale, way of analyzing cardiometabolic data into certain scores that, up until that point, has been teaching and informing people through his own educational initiatives. Now we're taking that a step further. We're incorporating all of that rationale and science into a specifically curated Frank Shallenberger report that is actually already available to some of our users. And obviously, in case you guys have additional questions about accessing this report, there is a link that I'm going to be posting shortly in the chat, so that you guys can get in touch with someone from our team and learn more information. So without further ado, just wanted to welcome again Dr. Shallenberger. If you wanted to say a few words before I go into my short intro about the report, and then we can hand it over to you.
Yeah, it's just great to be here, and I want to thank everybody that's attending this webinar. I want to thank you guys for showing up. And just really looking forward to it. It's very exciting to me. Panos mentioned our collaboration together, and I don't normally like to collaborate with anybody, but these guys are so good, and they work so well, and they're doing such a fabulous job. It's just a privilege and an honor, and I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shallenberger, for your words. They are an incredible honor. So before we go into the meat of Dr. Shallenberger's presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of a overview around PNOE and the reports and the information it provides, because many of you may not be familiar with, what exactly PNOE does and how this all fits into the realm of Dr. Shallenberger's work and teachings. So what I'll do is I will share my screen, and we can go over the report that we've created specifically for Dr. Shallenberger. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So to start with the very basics, PNOE is a cardiometabolic analyzer. Cardiometabolic analysis is a assessment that has been around for more than 100 years. It's actually a very old assessment, unlike what most people think. And it's an assessment during which we're analyzing three main variables. We're looking at oxygen concentration, CO2 concentration, and flow volume. By taking into account these three fundamental signals and running a lot of different analyses on these three different signals, we calculate 23 different biomarkers. Some of these biomarkers you guys may be familiar with, like VO2max or resting metabolic rate, but there are obviously others that are very insightful and very important, as they can reveal a lot of information about our overall health, but also about specific parts of our body. For instance, respiratory exchange ratio, which is indicating the substrate utilization in our body. That is what breakdown between fats and carbs your body is consuming. Dr. Shallenberger is going to talk a lot about this. But then others related to our respiratory mechanics, our cardiovascular system, and so on and so forth. So the way I like to think about breath analysis is the assessment that analyzes the health of what we refer to as the oxygen chain. The oxygen chain is effectively the conglomeration of the three main systems responsible for channeling oxygen and clearing carbon dioxide from our body. So what are these three systems? Your lungs, your heart/blood circulation, we consider that the cardiovascular system. And then lastly, you have the cellular or metabolic system. So you have the lungs, which is the inlet, right? What is sucking in oxygen. You have the pump, which is the cardiovascular system, your heart and circulation. And then ultimately you have the uptake, you have the utilization, the furnace of that system, which is where we dump in oxygen, we utilize it to oxidize fat and carbohydrates, and that process generates CO2 that needs to be cleared from that system in the opposite direction. So by taking these 23 biomarkers and grouping them into different categories, what we are able to do is we are able to double click and focus on each specific part of that chain. So not only does breath analysis provide us with metrics like VO2max, which are global in nature, as we like to call them, because they sort of provide a well-encompassing view of the health of the oxygen system. Breath analysis also provides us with metrics that can be specific to one or more of these subsystems. And obviously, as you can understand, by getting this level of specificity, we're able to understand where the problem is coming from, and therefore be much more strategic and personalized and specific in when we provide prescriptions, whether these are nutrition, training, lifestyle, or otherwise. So this is more or less how the report looks like. We provide a very comprehensive overview of the different things that are being analyzed when you're doing the test. And we have that as the introductory page so that people truly understand that breath analysis, unlike what most people think, is an assessment that actually goes beyond just measuring VO2max and resting metabolic rate. A lot of people have this misconception in their minds. And I think that's primarily because if you look at any other system in the past, what they would give you as a output is your VO2max, your resting metabolic rate, and maybe your training zones, which is a huge disservice to the assessment because it completely misses all of the parts of analyzing the different subsystems that I talked about. So we make it very clear to the end consumer, the recipient of the test, that, hey, what you just did is actually looking into all of these systems. And then in the overview page, we're looking into the crux of the report that shows us all the different scores we calculate that effectively paint the picture of the health of each subsystem. You can see here, the oxygen chain on the left with, arranged in a schematic that shows the bidirectional connection between the different systems, because, these systems, as Dr. Shallenberger will touch upon, are actually very much connected to each other. There's a lot of cases of people that are, bad breathers, right? They have breathing coordination issues, and that is translating into an oxygen delivery issue or another cardiovascular issue. So there's a lot of interplay and interconnectedness among these different systems. And with our schematic here, we're trying to capture that. And obviously next to each system, you will see the scores that are the most associated with every system. I'm obviously not going to go into every score right now. I want to hand this over to Dr. Shallenberger and perhaps just highlight the last part that people should be aware of when it comes to PNOE, The test, so the actual device and the report, which is what you see here, is just step one of the actual offering that PNOY provides. Step two, which is, I believe, equally important, is going to be the recommendation engine, which is us connecting the different scores that you see here with services, which could be longevity treatments, could be IVs, could be supplements that are being provided within the clinic that we are serving. And by doing this connection and including these services in the report, we're effectively enabling a lot of upselling to take place utilizing our test and our report, because it is very, very different to try to upsell a specific service to a client if you're talking to them with their biometrics at hand, utilizing a report that actually justifies why they need something versus just trying to pitch them on generic principles and value propositions. So without further ado, just wanted to provide a general understanding for everyone participating in the call. And, Dr. Shallenberger, over to you.
Okay, well, that's a good introduction. I will say that one of the reasons I like PNOY so much is because of the really good work you guys have done with all the various subsets, because you've made a good point pointing out that just VO2 max and aerobic capacity and such, these are super valuable measurements, but you guys have taken it to the next level with so many more measurements, and I'm going to get into them a little bit and some of the measurements that we just added in from what I've been doing. But for the audience out there, let me just say, I've been in medicine for 53 years now. For the last 25 of those years, I have pretty much devoted myself to this passion I have, and that is to prevent people from getting sick. Now, so we're going to talk about the medical uses of this in my presentation. And so without any further ado, let's just get into it. And let me see, I'm going to do a share screen here. And where are we? Here we go. Okay. Okay, are you seeing that?
Yep, all good.
Okay, so go over here to slideshow. And here we go. Okay, all right, so, okay, functional testing for health, anti-aging, and longevity using this system. And a philosophy I've lived by for a long time in medicine has been that the best treatment for any disease is don't get it. And in essence, that's where my thrust is going to be now. Of course, you can use these measurements to help people with disease, and we do that all the time. But the thing that really brings that really comes across well with this kind of testing is the whole prevention aspect. So so in my practice, we see a lot of people that are sick, but I just prefer to see nobody that's sick and everybody that's healthy coming in, and the whole concept, the whole reason they're there, and we're seeing a lot of this these days, by the way, whole reason they're there is because they don't want to get sick. They want to know, what do I do to not get sick? And since everybody's different, you can't come up with the same menu for everybody. You've got to individualize, well, this is how you need to eat, this is how you need to sleep, this is how you need to deal with stress, so forth and so on. And these measurements are an indispensable part of being able to do that. I do want to point out that just recently, cardiovascular surgeon Jeremy London, who's well known in the cardiovascular world, recently referenced what I've been saying for those 25 years. Your aerobic capacity, that's your ability to process oxygen efficiently, is the single most important measurement that you'll ever have that will determine your overall health and potential for longevity and disease. Now think about that. This is the single most important measurement that Dr. London is talking about. Single most important measurement, and yet here's the problem with it. Almost nobody checks it. Now that's just crazy. We need to change it. That's my passion. What I want to see is every longevity, every alternative physician out there has this available to them so that they can talk with our patients about staying well and getting well and never getting sick again. And what's great about this particular outfit, PNOE's made it easy, it's affordable, it's profitable, it's comprehensive. And so we're going to talk about all those kinds of things. But first of all, I want to get into, why should we test mitochondria? What's the big deal? Why should we test mitochondria at all? Well, here's the deal. There's a scientific maxim, and it's absolutely true. Nothing gets treated that isn't measured. If you don't measure it, it doesn't get treated. Think of blood sugar. If you're not measuring somebody's blood sugar, you don't know what it is. If you're not measuring their blood pressure, you don't know what it is. And we could go on and on in medicine. But if you can't measure something, you have no idea what you're doing. And yet, we're not measuring mitochondrial function. And I don't think, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Everybody knows that of all the things that are important to our health, mitochondrial function is at the top of the list. And you can go to search PubMed, just plug in mitochondrial function, and you will get thousands and thousands and thousands of articles that discuss it with every disease, every human condition. It's right at the bottom of everything. It's the thing that goes wrong with virtually everybody as we reach a certain point in our age. And yet nobody's measuring it. So we hope to overcome that. And we hope that everybody that's practicing medicine in this way does in fact measure mitochondrial function. Because number one, if you don't measure something, you don't know there's a problem. You don't even know there's a problem. If I don't measure your blood sugar, trust me, you can have a very high blood sugar and neither one of us know it. So if we don't know it, what are we going to do about it? We're going to completely ignore it. That's what we've done with mitochondrial testing. So we don't want to do that anymore. I want to find out what my mitochondria are doing, and I want to find out what my patient's mitochondria are doing. And if everything's great, fabulous. That's wonderful. But guess what? A lot of the times it isn't. And by the way, folks, there's no way to tell just by looking at a patient, examining a patient, looking at a laboratory profile. You don't get hardly any clue at all as to what's going on in the mitochondria, because all that stuff can work great and the mitochondria be going downhill anyway. So you have to measure it to know if there's a problem or not. Another reason you got to measure these things is because if there is a problem, you're now going to do something to solve the problem. Well, how do you know if what you're doing is actually solving the problem if you don't measure it? So if I say your blood sugar's high and you didn't know that, and I say, yeah, it's high, we're going to have to do something about that. If I don't go back and repeat the blood sugar measurement, I won't know if my treatment is actually working. So you got to measure it, find out where you stand. Once you find out where you stand, if you're great, fabulous, you know that what you're doing and the way you're living your life is matching up well with your genetics. But if you measure out poorly, that's good information to know. Now we can set about doing things and finding and continuing to monitor and finding out exactly what it is you need to do with your particular genetics to get your mitochondria operating along youthful levels. And then finally, the other reason to test mitochondrial function, because it helps with diagnosis. As Panos just pointed out, you've got all these systems that are involved, lots of systems, way too many for us to even discuss in one presentation, from the heart to the circulation to endotheliums to hemoglobin molecules and so forth and so on. There's all of these things, all of these parts have to come together in a way that's working together in order to get good mitochondrial function. So this is a great way to diagnose if there's something wrong with any one of those systems. Or another way of pointing it is, if I check my mitochondrial function and it's youthful, I don't hardly care about what else is going on in me, because it's a global way of testing me. On the other hand, if I test it and it's not so good, then I know, I got to go back and I got to look. Something's not right. It could be several things aren't right. So it's important for measuring, for monitoring, and diagnosing. Well, okay, so I've had 5 metabolic carts in my career. I bought them from different companies. We started buying them 30 years ago when they weren't nearly as good as now. The technology that PNOE is coming up with is absolutely remarkable. But so the big question is, how accurate are these measurements? So I do want to call your attention to this article here entitled Validity and Reliability of the New Portable Metabolic Analyzer that PNOE uses. And basically, they took a metabolic cart by a company called 𝐂𝐳𝐬. I've had one of their metabolic carts. It's incredibly accurate, and pretty much it's the gold standard for metabolic carts. Uh, and I will tell you, it's not so easy to use. You got to calibrate it, and it's big, and so forth and so on. But it is clearly the gold standard for metabolic carts.
Just for
And
folks to understand a little bit about 𝐂𝐳𝐬. 𝐂𝐳𝐬 is an Italian company. They're, sort of one of the, first companies in the world that appeared in the space, I think back in the 70s or something.
yeah,
So they have quite a bit of experience. 𝐂𝐳𝐬 Quark CPET is the flagship not portable, it's a stationary CPET machine they have, predominantly selling into cardiovascular centers and the clinical world, mainly focused in Europe. The equivalent in the United States would be medical graphics. They have a similar system called Ultima. Both of these systems range between 50+ thousand dollars. So, rather expensive. And this is the cost for just buying the system. Consumables and, the turbines that you need would be, additional cost to all of that. But, 𝐂𝐳𝐬 Quark CPET is actually an extremely accurate system, and that's why we used it. Just a little bit of background information when we were running the validation study. Even Dr. Shallenberger doesn't know that. We actually attempted to do the validation with another portable system that 𝐂𝐳𝐬 produced. It's called the K5. It's also quite expensive. It's, I think, between $30,000 and $40,000 and quite bulky, actually. But unfortunately, that system wasn't accurate enough. We have metabolic simulators and lots of high precision measuring devices at our office. And unfortunately, we arrived to the same conclusion as some scientific peer-reviewed publications have arrived regarding the accuracy of the K5 𝐂𝐳𝐬, which is that it's not a very accurate system. And since a lot of you guys may be tuning in from the United States, some of you may also are familiar with core, which is another system that is sort of popular in our space. Obviously, we couldn't use core because if you look at the validation study that they have on their website, it just shows that it's not a very accurate system, has pretty significant deviation and error margins. And then the other, I would say, even more significant issue is that it's not a breath-by-breath system, meaning that it has a mixing chamber, and therefore it does not measure some key variables that you need in order to conduct the full-blown breath-by-breath cardiometabolic testing. It is missing tidal volume, which is the amount of air coming in of your mouth in every breathing cycle. You can't really capture that because you're not measuring every single breath. You're collecting exhaled gas, putting it in a box, and then sampling it every, set time interval. So one of the things that you're missing is tidal volume. And then the other thing that is extremely important in multiple different scores that we calculate is end-tidal CO2, which is the highest concentration of CO2 during exhalation. You need this in order to understand hyperventilation. You need that in order to understand oxygen delivery capacity, because our blood's ability to deliver oxygen-rich blood across the body is highly dependent on how much CO2 you have circulating in the blood. A lot of people tend to think that CO2 is a wasteful byproduct. As a matter of fact, a lot of people call it the most powerful hormone because it is actually the element that enables oxygen molecules to enter the cell. And hence, support mitochondrial function that Dr. Shallenberger was talking about. So when you breathe up normally and you discharge a lot of CO2, your oxygen delivery capacity drops precipitously, and that is a major risk factor for many, many conditions, including neurodegeneration for the most part. So, you can't really capture that information if you don't have end-tidal CO2. End-tidal CO2 correlates with arterial CO2. So you're using end-tidal CO2 to understand what is happening in terms of CO2 concentrations within the bloodstream. But if you don't have that information, you can't really, make any such determinations. Small parentheses on what's happening out in the market in terms of other solutions. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those other carts. Folks, I've had them all. And yeah, PNOE's got this little tiny little thing that works better than all of them. And it's so much easier to use. So let me just say that. And you did such a good job presenting some information to everybody to know that these are accurate readings. You got to get accurate readings. Whether it's a blood pressure cuff or you're measuring blood sugar, you need to have a machine that's actually measuring it accurately and can reproduce the results accurately. And PNOE meets all those standards. And just to summarize this one slide here, I'm just going to skip down to the conclusion part where it says our data. Now, again, they're comparing the PNOE unit to the gold standard. And they're saying our data indicates that the portable metabolic cart that PNOE makes can accurately determine respiratory gases over a very wide range of exercise intensities in healthy individuals in a controlled laboratory setting. Folks, that's all I want to hear before I go out and I buy some equipment to help me with my patients. I want to know that we get some accuracy, and you get it with this equipment. But you need other things to do this job, by the way. So the VO2 and the VCO2s, that's covered by the PNOE equipment. You really should have a spirometry to do this job right. Certainly if you're working in medicine, you've got to have one of those. You really ought to have a very good comprehensive composition analysis machine. I happen to use the in-body system. I like that a lot. It's not the absolute gold standard. The absolute gold standard is like $60,000, and I don't know that I really need that, but you should have some good body composition, a way to analyze body composition. And you need a computer-driven ergometer versus a manual exercise machine. And the ergometer I prefer because it's easier to use, and but it's also more expensive. So there's different ways to go, and certainly by contacting PNOE, you can learn how to,
Just
which
a
way
short
you
parenthesis here, in order to make sure people are aware of the fact that there are several options and alternatives for cycloergometers that are actually very accurate, much cheaper ones than the Ergolines. Doctor, I'm not sure which one you're using. I don't know if you're using Ergoline or some other medical brand, but yeah, these can be quite expensive. These are companies selling cycloergometers into the medical space, and as we know, whenever you sell into the medical space, everything just gets like a huge inflation.
double the cost.
Yeah. So there are solutions, for instance, using a Wahoo kicker, which is this pad that triathletes use to plug in their bicycles and be able to train indoors. That's actually a very slick device because you can sort of create your own power profiles, and it's gonna, give you the power profile that you want, which is ultimately what you need to run a good breath analysis test. If you want something a little bit more robust, that maybe looks a little bit more sort of like official for a clinic, Wattbike is a very, very good option. Again, has automatic impedance, meaning that it can be programmed to give you this nice, smooth, linear increase in wattage. And these are multiple times cheaper than an Ergoline or other medical grade cycloergometers.
Okay, good point. So yeah, basically you're looking at kind of an outlay of in the order of $50,000 to get your setup. It's and you're going to need to hire somebody to do the readings. But here's the point: you're going to do these tests on everybody. Anybody who walks in your office, if they're a kid, maybe not a kid, but if they're over 35, you absolutely need to get baseline readings. I published one paper that demonstrated that in a group of asymptomatic 35-year-old people, 12% of them had mitochondrial disorders, 12%, and they were asymptomatic. Now, those people are going to get sick if you don't do something about it now. So literally everybody over the age of 35 should have at least one baseline test from which you can compare, and then every 3 to 5 years, subsequent tests so you can follow them. So you're going to do this test on everybody. So keep that in mind. It's not one of those things you're going to selectively do for just a few people that walk in your office. You're going to do it on everybody over the age of 25 as a baseline, and then once every 1 to 3 years is needed, anywhere from 2 to 3 times per year if the baseline's poor. So you got to do it several times in order to see that, oh yeah, I've got the system right now, their mitochondrial function is improving, and we're off to a good start here. And then just to let you know, don't worry about the fact you're going to have to outlay $50,000 to get this going. That can be spread out over 4 years. And to tell you the truth, literally, in my practice for the last 20 some odd years has been netting in the order of 28 to $38,000 a month, just on the testing, and not including the fact that people seek me out. They fly in all over in order to have this kind of testing done. So it increases my patient database. So it's a little bit of hassle getting started with this kind of thing. On the other hand, it's so worth it. You want to do an excellent job for your patients, and this is a big part of doing that. So I encourage everybody to seriously look into this. Okay, my goal today is to talk about VO2, VOC testing, and it's been used for a long time to determine fitness parameters in elite athletes. But 25 years ago, I was interested in that space, and then I got these devices and I started measuring them, and I realized, boy, there's a lot of people that have problems with these things. The testing was always used in elite athletes, but what about Joe Lunchbox? And it's amazing to realize how good you can feel and yet have poor mitochondrial function and be on the road to disease. And you're not going to discover it for, what, 5, 10 years, but you're on the road right now. So let's change that road. So it's the only way to prevent disease, but also to properly reverse disease. And that's because it's the only system or method measuring these the VO2s and the VCO2s capable of determining and evaluating and optimizing mitochondrial function, which in truth is the holy grail of functional medicine. So this webinar is going to shed some light on how you can do that. It's going to get a little complex. Don't worry about that. You can get copies of my slides. We're going to be doing more educational seminars anyway. So it is going to get a little complex, but this is more or less an overview for you to just be amazed with all the information that you can get from this kind of testing. Okay. So once again, the best treatment for any disease is not to get it. The end of disease can only come with early diagnosis of the causes of the disease. So if you don't want to get sick, I'm pretty much sure nobody wants to get sick. The only way you can prevent getting sick is to look at what causes you to getting sick. And in that context, there's no more important parameter to measure in your healthy patients than mitochondrial function. Suboptimal mitochondrial function begins as very early in your 30s. Now, normal people aren't going to notice this, but if you're an elite athlete, you will notice this. You will notice that I'm 38 years old now. I just can't do what I did when I was 28. That's because they've lost mitochondrial function. Normal human beings aren't going to notice this till we get to be 50, 55-ish. And then we start thinking, you know what, I can still ride my bike up that hill, but I don't do it so fast. And that's your indication that this thing kind of starts early, and we want to get onto it early and optimize it so it stays really good for as long a time as possible. And while it's possible to get sick when you have excellent VO2s, it's pretty unlikely. So we did a study not too long ago, unpublished study, but we did a study of all our patients with respect to cancer. And we found that out of something like 200 patients of ours that ultimately developed cancer, only 2 of them had normal mitochondrial function. They almost all had abnormal mitochondrial function before they got the cancer. Likewise, it is highly unlikely. I've seen it a couple of times. It's pretty unlikely I'm going to see anybody with cancer that has had normal VO2 function testing. So an integrative functional practitioner who isn't monitoring mitochondrial function, kind of like a cardiologist who doesn't monitor cardiac function, or a pulmonologist who doesn't do any pulmonary function testing, or an internist that's doesn't have a blood pressure cuff or doesn't have any availability lab tests. You're just operating in the dark. You don't know if there's a problem. You don't know how to solve the problem. And you don't know if you actually are solving the problem, if people are just wasting their time. So hopefully this presentation will get you all fired up to want to get involved in this and start testing every single person that walks in your door, and yourself too, by the way. So are you healthy or just not sick? So one of the things I like to ask in all my presentations is, how many people? How do you determine who's healthy and who's not? Now we clearly know that the defining characteristic of health is not the absence of anything. You can have perfectly normal, absent any abnormal blood tests. You don't have any abnormal blood pressure. You don't have any abnormal lesions growing on your body or problems or symptoms. You're asymptomatic, and yet 4 days later you find out you've got stage 4 cancer. So the defining characteristic of health is not the absence of anything; it's the presence of something. If you want to get a kind of a sense for what it's the presence of, go follow a 2-year-old around for a while. They have awfully good VO2, VCO2 functioning, and just monitor them for a while, and you'll see it's the presence of something. It's the presence of being able to take that oxygen and process it into the energy. And as I was pointing out, our function ability to be able to do this starts to decline in the early 30s. By the time you reach 55 years, it starts to become noticeable. And understand that the goal of functional medicine is to make sure our patients maintain youthful mitochondrial function for as long as possible. Now that's key, because you can be, and I'm not going to get into the actual measurements this time, although I will later, but here I am. I'm a 79-year-old guy, and I have the mitochondrial function that is typical of a 33-year-old young person. Now, how did I get to be that way? Well, I think I was blessed with good genetics for starters, but fact is I've been measuring my mitochondrial function for the last 25 years, and there are things I've had to do to be able to keep that going even as I've gotten older. So the point is, I have patients in their mid to late 80s that have mitochondrial function of people in their 30s. It's not by accident. It's because we measure it and we figure out what they need, we optimize it, and then we monitor it to make sure that what we're doing is actually doing it, because our goal is primarily for healthy individuals to stay healthy as they get older, but also in people that are sick, we can help to determine the reason they got sick is because they had poor mitochondrial function. That was at the very base of why they got sick. So repair that, and everything else starts to flow from that. So all the oxygen you breathe in, interestingly, where's it going? What are you doing with that oxygen? It's only going in one place. It doesn't go in a multiplicity of places, which makes it super easy to figure out what's going on because it goes into the mitochondria. That's all. It doesn't go anyplace else. So if I can follow oxygen, I know what's going on in mitochondria. It's very simple. It's processed in the mitochondria into water, ATP, and CO2. So by looking at CO2 and how it's processed, I can learn an awful lot about what's going on in the mitochondria of my patients. If you're processing a lot of oxygen, in other words, you have a very high VO2, you have a healthy number a very good functioning mitochondria. Bingo, that's what you want. If you're producing too much VCO2, you have a high CO2 level, your mitochondria are not working efficiently. You might have a lot of them, but they're not working very efficiently. Thus, by determining the total amount of oxygen being processed and the total amount of CO2 being produced, we can determine with absolute precision the amount of mitochondria you have and how efficiently they're working. And the goal is maximum mitochondrial amount. You want the most. When you're born, you have something in the order of 3,000 to 4,000 mitochondria per cell. That will vary from organ to organ, but something in that order. And by the time you hit 70, you might have 2/3 of that. So the goal is maximum mitochondrial amount and optimal mitochondrial function, and that can only be determined by one thing. There's no other way to determine this, folks. In experimental situations, in the literature, you'll see that in experimental situations, they can do all kinds of interesting things. But in clinical practice, this is it. If you want to know how your mitochondria are working, it's VO2, VCO2 testing, period. There's nothing else to determine that. I want to put in here the 4 stages of disease and aging that we've been able to discover using mitochondrial testing. So look at this healthy fellow on the left there. This is right here is his aerobic capacity. Now that term you're going to learn before this presentation is over. That's the amount of energy he can produce from oxygen. It's called aerobic capacity. Now up here is VO2 max. That VO2 max is the amount of energy he can produce aerobically, which is all this, plus the amount of energy he can produce anaerobically, which is all this. That's your max. Mostly we're just interested in this, aerobic capacity. This anaerobic capacity is super good for athletes, but for you and I to stay healthy, this is really what we're interested in. Now, there's 2 ways that we can maximize our energy production, and that is 1, by oxidizing glucose, and 2 is oxidizing fat. The way the human body works is the healthiest people are the ones that primarily get their energy production from fat utilization. That's a sign of ultimate health. So as you're moving along from ultimate health in the other direction, notice what happens. You tend to get fatter, don't you? Yeah, you tend to get fatter.
I just wanted Dr. Shallenberger to maybe pitch in a little bit and also provide another vantage point that confirms and provides like further credence to this concept here, which is the following. Fat is a molecule that always requires oxygen to be burned. And so that ultimately means, from a reverse mechanism, that the more mitochondria you have, the more oxygen you will be able to absorb into the cell, and then inevitably the more fat you're going to be able to utilize as a fuel source. And that is why when we say that we measure fat and carbohydrate oxidation through metabolic testing, we are not necessarily tracking or scanning mitochondria the same way we would be scanning them if we were to run some sort of mass spectroscopy in a lab. We're actually measuring their direct operation. So we're doing an indirect functional assessment, so to speak. But we are measuring fundamentally the primary function behind mitochondrial operation, which is pulling oxygen in. But then the pulling of the oxygen into the cell is going to inevitably lead to more fat oxidation, because, as we said, fat will always require oxygen to be oxidized. And in the presence of oxygen, and obviously in the presence of enough mitochondria, our cells will turn to fat as a fuel source versus carbohydrates, which is glucose in that case, in this presentation.
So we can tell from this analysis, how much fat or how much glucose you're burning at any moment. It's pretty simple, because when you're burning glucose per molecule of oxygen, you're producing 1/2 as much CO2. So by looking at the ratio CO2 to oxygen, I can tell you at any moment in time, are you primarily generating your energy from glucose, or are you primarily generating your energy from fat? And what I want you guys to understand is that the healthy situation is where most of your energy production is coming from fat. Now that changes. So as you get older, as things start to become more toxic, as you become more stressed out, whatever, you start moving from this very healthy stage to another stage, the next stage. Everything's the same. You're still making the same amount of energy. Your aerobic capacity is still the same. Your anaerobic capacity is still the same. Your VO2 max still the same. So from all that standpoint, nothing's changed. But what's changed is subtle. You're now producing less and less energy from fat and depending more and more on glucose. That creates a whole bunch of problems when you come down to insulin sensitivity. But at this point, very often, people are asymptomatic. Either that, or they're having sort of functional symptoms. Things aren't quite right, but they're, quote, healthy for their age. You go see the doctor says everything's just fine. But it's not just fine. They're starting to shift over from a fat metabolism that's healthy to more dependent on glucose. And then the next stage is it all goes bad. Now the mitochondria are finally starting to go bad, and you're relying more and more on anaerobic energy production. And as that happens, notice your VO2 max is still the same, but you're relying more and more on anaerobic energy production, and that's going to create a host of problems. Unfortunately, all of these two stages right in here, where'd it go? All of these two stages right in here, unfortunately, often happen, you don't even know about it. Unless you're measuring it, you don't even have a clue you're in that person. Ultimately, you get into this last final stage, which is the one called mitochondrial decay, where it's all gone to heck now. Your mitochondria aren't working. You get very little energy produced from either fat or glucose. Most of your energy is produced anaerobically. Your VO2 max drops out, and now this often becomes irreversible, folks, and I don't want my patients to get to this irreversible state. We can improve upon it, but it's not like I can get, if somebody's here, the odds of me getting them back here, not so good. On the other hand, if they're here, the odds of me getting them back there, if I'm testing them early enough and doing all the right things and monitoring them properly, pretty easy to get them back here. Okay, so bioenergy testing, this is a system that Panos was alluding to that I invented and patented some 20-odd years ago and have been using. And what I'm so excited about is PNOE is now put in these particular testing parameters of mine in their new system. So we're going to spend a little time talking about that. But in order to do this, the patient's going to come into my office. We're going to do a resting VO2, VCO2 analysis for about 10 minutes, maybe, something like that. And then we're going to put them on a bicycle or whatever instrument of exercise we're going to use. And we're going to do that for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. So the whole procedure is in the order of 35, 40 minutes, something like that. We usually schedule patients about 45 minutes apart. And then we get that data, it runs through a computer, and you get all this incredible information that we're going to be talking about. This is not a VO2 max test. Now, VO2 max means you've got to put them on the exercise machine until they just wear out. They can't do anything anymore. There's some dangers to doing that. We don't like to do that, except if we got competitive athletes. That's different. We'll do it on a competitive athlete. But in my regular patients that are walking in the office, I don't want to initiate any kind of adverse cardiac event. And so as long as you just go up to the aerobic capacity event and not any further, promise you, there will never be a cardiac event that you have, so you don't have to worry about it. The resting requires fasting. I prefer that my patients take all their medications, any hormones or any supplements they're on before we do this test, because I want to know if their medications are interfering with the test. I want to know if their hormones and or supplements are helping or maybe possibly even interfering with the test. So I want them to do exactly what they're doing, except no food, because food will throw the resting readings off. You can split the test up so that you could do just a resting portion of the test, or you could do an exercise portion of the test. The resting portions always have to be done fasting. The exercise portions of the test, however, can be done without fasting. So just kind of keep all that in mind in terms of follow-up monitoring. Now, here's one thing that I've introduced that's different from a lot of readings. And that is, if you're over the age of 40, I'm going to compare your readings to a database of 40-year-old people, your height and weight and sex. Why? Because, like I said, I'm 79. I don't want to be healthy for the average 79-year-older. I want to be healthy for the average 35-year-older. So I'm going to compare my readings to a younger database. So if you're over the age of 40, we're going to compare your readings to a database of people who are 40 years old, no matter what your age is. On the other hand, if you're younger than 40, we, at that point, compare you to your own median of the database of people your age. The other thing is, we found out that if you have excess body fat on you, that excess weight, since it's there's not much metabolic usage for that body fat, it kind of it skews the readings in a way that makes fat people look like they're in worse shape than they actually are. So we do correct for excess body fat. So I just wanted you to know that. So this particular parameters that I've been using evaluates 5 factors. One of them I call energy quotient. One I call M factor. That's going to measure resting metabolism. One I call C factor. The C stands for carbohydrate. And so it's going to measure resting fat metabolism. And finally, I do something called fat burning factor, which looks at how well you metabolize fat and exercise, while the other one, how well you metabolize fat during rest. And we can use all those numbers to come up with some very interesting stuff. And so we're going to go over those numbers here in a sec. Now, additionally to this, as Panos was pointing out, they measure several other things, especially flow, which I've never really gotten into measuring. So they have some super interesting other calculations and measurements that I'm going to also discuss: VO2 peak, ventilation efficiency, respiratory capability, breathing coordination, lung utilization, and high intensity performance, which are all additional valuable assets for the medical management of my patients. So in this webinar, we're going to look at each one of those. And in the next webinar, and there will be another one for follow-up, we're going to go into what, from a medical standpoint, all these things mean and what you can do about these things. So first of all, I want to discuss energy quotient. This is determined by a 30-second exercise ramping protocol, which means that every 30 seconds, the amount of work in watts that you're going to have to do on that exercise equipment is going to go up a unit. We can set that for patients that are in poor aerobic conditioning. We can set that for something low, like only 3 watts per 30 seconds. For people that are in much better condition, we can set it for more watts so that we get a better reading in people that are like athletic or in very good aerobic fitness. So that's all something that you can learn how to set when you're doing the test. The energy quotient is going to evaluate your aerobic capacity. Remember that highest line there. Aerobic capacity, which indicates the maximal mitochondrial function. It's not the same as VO2 max. VO2 max indicates maximal mitochondrial function plus maximal anaerobic function. I'm not interested in anaerobic function except in athletes, so we don't typically take anybody to VO2 max, but we are interested in this concept of aerobic capacity. And that's what energy quotient is going to measure. Your aerobic capacity, the maximum amount of oxygen that you can process in your mitochondria, as it compares to what's usual and typical for a younger database. Now, if you have a low EQ, you could have any one of a bunch of problems. However, if I test your EQ and it's good and youthful, I more or less don't have to think about any of these problems. I can more or less tell you, and I do this with all my patients. Every patient comes to my office. If it's an annual or if they're a new patient and they come into my office, they're going to walk into my room with all these results. before I even meet them. And between that and about an hour of talking with them, I've got them almost always completely figured out. Because if their EQ is low, they've got issues. I've got to consider toxicity, especially heavy metals, especially a toxic diet, maybe environmental toxins. I've got to consider nutrient deficiencies, particularly iron and B vitamins and magnesium. I've got to consider decreased fat metabolism secondary to excessive carbohydrate intake. A disaster in our culture right now is excessive carbohydrate intake. On the other hand, some people need carbohydrates. So how do you know? You can determine it from this kind of testing. Decreased methylation. This is the only way you can effectively measure what's going on with methylation, because methylation is tied one-to-one with mitochondrial function. Hormonal deficiencies, particularly thyroid, cortisol, and DHEA. This is almost always missed in sick people. The tests are just not that accurate. The blood tests aren't that accurate. And this is one way for me to determine what's going on with the thyroid, their adrenals, without having to rely on inaccurate blood testing. You can measure decreased cardiac output very simply and easily. You can measure a pulmonary dysfunction. You can have a pretty good window into anemia. Of course, you're going to have to follow that up with a blood test. But you can look at hemoglobinopathies, particularly glycohemoglobin excess. All of these things can decrease energy quotient. And finally, you think of endothelial function, which is your body's ability to circulate all the blood to those mitochondria that we've been talking about. So there's a wide list of possibilities if that energy quotient is low. And over the next few webinars, we're going to be talking about and giving actual case presentations on how we work through all that and figure it out. So when they come in, I see their energy quotient. If it's good, I'm pretty much done with my deal right there. But of course, I'll be talking to them for about an hour in my initial. And I want to know if it's poor, I want to know what's their exercise schedule? What medications are they on? Are they on any of the medications that are known? There's quite a few of them, by the way. Quite a few medications that are commonly dished out, particularly statins, by the way. Medications that the FDA has black box warnings on are mitochondrial suppressants. Occupation, I want to know their occupational regional exposure history in terms of heavy metals, toxins, and such. I want to know about stress. Are they getting enough sleep, etc.? I want to know about their diet. In terms of my examination, obviously, I want to check their blood pressure and all their vital signs. I want to do a TIL test for their adrenal function. I want to look in their mouth to see if they have silver dental fillings, because those contain mercury. Mercury is a potent mitochondrial toxin. I want to look at the periodontal health, the health of their gums, because we know that's associated with very poor endothelial function. Of course, I want to feel their heart rate, maybe do an EKG to make sure they don't have an arrhythmia. I want to listen to their lungs to make sure they don't have any bronchoconstriction. I want to look at the extracellular water to total body water ratio that comes with the body composition analysis. And also want to know, do they have increased visceral fat as per that body composition analysis? So now I've got all this data. I've got it in 15, 20 minutes. This doesn't take long. At that point, I'm going to say, okay, let's look at some additional testing now. Again, these are people with poor energy quotient. The people with good energy quotient, we just have a good time talking about why they're so good. And I basically say, keep doing what you're doing, and I'll see you in a year. And we'll just test you again every year. We'll just test you, make sure that you're holding the line like you have been. But with poor mitochondrial testing, I'm going to be going through this examination and all the history and such. And I might want to look at the MTHFR gene. Probably will want to look at that. Quest Labs now will tell you all their vitamins and mineral levels. They do a great job. Serum methylmalonate has to do with vitamin B12 deficiency. So that's a good way to assess that. B12 is critically important for mitochondrial health. UPPA is urinary porphyrin profile analysis, which details toxicity. So if they have a low EQ, I want to know, is this because of toxicity? And the UPPA is a good way to screen for that. We can do specific heavy metal testing. I certainly want to look at iron. I want to look at both the iron panel and the ferritin. That is absolutely critical for mitochondrial function. I want to check out their basic CBC to make sure they're not anemic. That will ruin energy quotient. I want to make sure their homocysteine level isn't too high. If it's too high, that can have negative effect on the endothelial lining and circulation. I'm going to cross-check on their TSH to make sure that they don't have an undiagnosed hypothyroidism. I want to look at ACTH, which is a way of cross-checking their cortisol. I'm going to look at DHEAS, which is another adrenal measurement. I have found in my clinical work that so many of my patients have adrenal problems that it's almost basically, I have concluded if you walk into my office and you have symptoms, you got an adrenal problem. But you can measure that and deal with that because that will have an impact on the energy quotient. I want to look at the O2 saturation at peak exercise. That'll tell me a lot about ventilation and lung capacity. I'm going to look at spirometry. We do spirometry on everybody that has this test. I'm specifically want to look at A1C, hemoglobinopathy, because they have an elevated A1C. They won't be able to deliver oxygen as efficiently as if they didn't.
And I
And
just want to
finally,
highlight that,
yeah,
elevated hemoglobin A1C is something that we also, in the thousands and thousands of tests we do every month. And for those who also combine the test with blood work, we see a very strong correlation between poor fat burn efficiency, which ultimately translates to poor energy quotient. Very strong correlation between these two and elevated hemoglobin A1C. As a matter of fact, I was just on the phone the other day with the owner of a very big, one of the most, I would say, popular and big franchises in the longevity space in terms of integrative medicine clinics, and he's super healthy. What some people would consider jacked. Less than less than 11% body fat, but still, reports low fat burn efficiency in their metabolic test. And then recently they did a comprehensive blood panel and they had elevated almost 100 actually uh, fasted blood glucose, and then also elevated hemoglobin A1C was, I think, between 5.5 and 5.6, and 5.7 is actually the cutoff for being considered pre-diabetic. So 100% something that people should look into.
yeah, good point. So the quality of your hemoglobin is going to determine a lot of this. And finally, you can get the little sublingual nitrite sticks. I like to use them. They're not 100% accurate, but it'll give me a little bit of a window into what's going on in the endothelium. So these are the kinds of things. If your energy quotient is great, congratulations, good. See you later. If it's not so good, now we're going to sit down and we're going to figure out how to fix that before you get sick, before you have a problem. Okay, M factor is another factor we look
Sorry,
at.
Dr. Shallenberger, just like a very short parentheses for people here, because a lot of you guys may be wondering how can we combine all of this. So we actually have a dedicated dashboard. I'm just gonna show it very briefly here. Um, that was a project that we were working on separately from Dr. Shallenberger's report, but obviously it's very timely and synergistic for what we've been discussing here. So in our dashboard here, through the client management portal, you can actually navigate to each client, and then you have the ability to upload all of the different lab results you're collecting from multiple different sources. Not only do we just store the results and use them in different instances, for example, in the instance of Dr. Shallenberger's report, but we also categorize them. So we're gonna, take all of the different blood biomarkers, for instance, related to lungs, and we're gonna group them under lungs, and then we're gonna do the same for heart, for instance. And obviously, that doesn't just apply to blood biomarkers. It applies to urine, stool, saliva, body composition. Everything that we've been discussing is actually ingestible in this dashboard. And in addition to grouping them, we actually score them. We tell you what's normal, what's not normal, what's out of range. Very soon, you will also be able to upload your own sort of bespoke threshold in case you want to view things differently than what the general guidelines provide or what the other doctor next door provides. It's totally up to you guys. Also, obviously, you have the ability to track things over time. And very cool part is you can actually upload all the tests in PDF or JPEG or PNG format, and our AI OCR tool is going to automatically extract all the biomarkers and place them in the right place in the database. So you don't have to do any sort of like manual input. In case that fails, you can obviously upload things manually. But just wanted to point that out and make sure that people are aware of the fact that we do provide all the sort of software infrastructure for this sort of analysis to take place, because I understand that one of the biggest challenges people face is that we're talking about a lot of data. We're talking about a lot of data entry points, and it becomes almost chaotic for a lot of the clinics to be able to deal with this amount of data. So we built this to address that challenge.
Okay, good point. I didn't even know you guys were doing that. So that's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm gonna have to learn about that.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry, Doctor. I think you need to reshare.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
yeah.
here we go. Yep. Okay. So M factor. That's going to happen with a 10-minute resting protocol. It's going to basically evaluate your resting metabolism, but it's also going to evaluate in terms of metabolism how many calories you're burning per 24 hours. But it's also going to evaluate whether those calories are coming from fat metabolism or whether they're coming from glucose metabolism, which turns out to be super critical on how you prescribe the correct diet for an individual. So decreased M factor indicates hypothyroidism. Now, I could go off for a whole hour talking about this. Of course, I won't. But let me just very briefly say, you cannot trust the TSH or any of the thyroid readings. You cannot trust them at all for conditions related to age-related hypothyroidism. They're pretty good if you have a thyroid disease. Okay, you got Graves' disease, you've got clinical hypothyroidism. They're pretty good that way. But as we get older, guess what happens to your thyroid function? It doesn't get better, folks. It gets worse. And those tests will not figure it out. You will miss it. And this is critical for a lot of older people over the age of 50. They have hypothyroidism and it's not being diagnosed and they're having problems from it. And the only way you're ever going to know it is the way they used to do it prior to 1960 when all the blood tests came out. They used to actually measure your metabolism. So that's what we do. You measure metabolism. It will tell you about whether the patient's hypothyroidism. The lab test will be normal, and you'll see that their metabolism is dramatically reduced, even in the view of a normal blood test, if they're just not accurate. You can look at sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is another reason. Muscle mass loss is another reason for a decreased resting metabolism. And finally, sleep disturbance. So if I get my M factor and it's looking pretty darn good, I can think to myself, you know what? They probably got a good functioning thyroid. They probably have a decent functioning muscle mass, and they're apparently getting enough deep sleep to keep their metabolism looking youthful. Undiagnosed hypothyroidism is a major cause of suboptimal mitochondrial function, and it's almost always not diagnosed. Again, you don't diagnose it, you don't treat it. So additional history, I'm going to ask my patient, do you have hypothyroid type of symptoms? There's 20 some odd symptoms associated with that. Certainly one of them is weight gain. I definitely, part of my history has to be, how do you sleep? When you go to sleep, what do you wake up? Do you wake up during the night? How many times do you fall back asleep? Blah, blah, blah. Do you have somnambulance during the day? That's critical. Because if you do, that's a good likelihood you have a sleep disorder, which is super common and often goes undiagnosed. In terms of examination, I'm going to examine the thyroid. I'm going to look at the skin to see if the skin or edema or any weight issues look like they're in a hypothyroid state. I'm going to look at a low resting heart rate in a non-athletic person can indicate hypothyroidism. I'm going to look at the delayed tendon reflexes. You hit the tendon reflex. If it's delayed, that's a sign of hypothyroidism. We can look at body composition to determine the muscle mass. Look in that mouth, folks. Look in the mouth. Learn how to determine whether they have the anatomic indications of obstructive sleep apnea. And then, of course, in terms of additional testing, you can certainly test the TSH. You really ought to test, if they have hypothyroidism, you really ought to test the RT3, the reverse T3. That's often overlooked, but that could be a big problem in view of everything else being normal, and they're still have low resting metabolic rate. Could very likely be an elevation in reverse T3. Look at thyroid antibodies. Check their serum iodine level. You'll find 20% of the time it'll be suppressed. And do an overnight oximetry on so many of these patients. Do that because you want to catch this sleep apnea thing early before it becomes much of a problem. And that's one good way you can screen for that.
I just wanted to chime in here, Dr. Shallenberger, really fast about the sleep apnea point. One of the pulmonary biomarkers that we include in the report, which, earlier you mentioned that, we do actually provide quite a bit of in-depth analysis when it comes to the respiratory component of our biology. There is one marker in the report that's included in the standard report, but also obviously in the Shallenberger report, that's called ventilation efficiency. And it's actually a marker that looks into oxygen perfusion and CO2 discharge from within the lungs. So if there is anything along the lines of internal lung inflammation, that could be a consequence of long COVID, could be a consequence of asthma, COPD, but also sleep apnea. Ventilation efficiency is going to get a hit in all these cases. And so there's actually ample literature that, actually predates PNOE around the correlation between VE over VCO2. VE over VCO2 is the biomarker that sits behind our score ventilation efficiency. So there's a lot of literature. There's a lot of interesting data in the literature correlating VE over VCO2 with sleep apnea. And just for people to wrap their minds around what VE over VCO2 is, VE is ventilation. So basically how much air in liters you're exchanging when the environment per unit of time, most typically minutes. So it's basically your tidal volume times breathing frequency. That is giving us so-called ventilation. And then VCO2, as we discussed earlier, is volume of carbon dioxide discharge. So how much CO2, how much volume of CO2 you're discharging per breathing cycle. And so when you're looking at the ratio of VE over VCO2, VE in the numerator, VCO2 in the denominator, you're basically looking to see if you have an elevation in that biomarker. So if this biomarker is elevated, it means that the denominator, VCO2, is being suppressed. That's why it's causing the ratio to go up. And that pretty much means that per breathing cycle, you're less able to discharge CO2. And, from what we've seen, again, in the literature, but now also from the thousands of tests we do, there's a very strong correlation between that biomarker and sleep apnea. Over to you again.
Yeah, if that CO2 is increasing, as Panos just pointed out, if that's increasing, you're not getting rid of it and it's increasing, that's a big problem. So you can equate that with increasing acid production in your body, and it causes the breakdown of everything. So that's a really important reading. And the next reading I want to get into is something I call C factor. The C means carbohydrate, so we're looking at how well your your mitochondria prefer to generate energy in a resting condition, either from glucose or from fat. As I indicated before, in a resting condition, your body should definitely prefer to be living almost entirely off fat and not off glucose. If it's shifting over to glucose, that's not a good sign. So that's where we measure this. If it's decreased, if that number is decreased below 90%, it indicates a shift away from the fat metabolism to a glucose metabolism. Again, this is one of the first shifts that you do on your way to becoming unhealthy. And if it gets down to below 60%, that means that in a resting condition, with you just sitting there, you're burning 100% glucose. You're not burning any fat at all. That can literally happen to an awful lot of people. And that leads to a whole bunch of 90%. That indicates pretty optimal dietary fat to carbohydrate burning. Additional history when you're looking at that number is, the dietary composition of carbohydrates versus fat and protein. This is particularly determined by the diet in the 4 to 5 days prior to the measurement. So I always tell my patients, when you get this measurement, make sure that your diet for the 4 to 5 days prior to me testing you is pretty indicative of the way you always eat. If you go on a cruise and you're eating desserts all day long for 4 days and then you get the test, it's not going to give you a reliable description of the way you are in general. We also want to, screen for tiredness and or brain fog in the afternoon. That's characteristic for people that do not burn fat well. As Panos was pointing out, we want to look for sleep disturbances. We want to look for weight issues. Weight issues and sleep disturbances go together. Is there a family history of diabetes? If so, you've got to take that into consideration. And finally, on the examination, we're looking for visceral fat, body fat percentage, all of which give us a clue. Is this person predominantly burning glucose, or is this person predominantly burning fat? Important to know. Now, you have to interpret this in terms of the energy quotient, because here's the point. You're going to have people out there whose mitochondria work wonderfully on glucose. That's just the way they work. It's like you got 2 cars in your garage. One works on diesel, one works on gas. That's the way it is. A lot of people, their mitochondria just works great on carbohydrates. On the other hand, you have quite a few people whose mitochondria do not work well on carbohydrates. They work well on fat. So how they eat and what they do with their diet is going to be important depending on which kind of person they are. If they're a person that burns fat most efficiently, they ought to be on a high fat diet. Conversely, if they're on a person that burns glucose most efficiently, you ought to be on a low fat, higher carbohydrate type of diet. So how are you going to figure that out? It's pretty easy. You just look at the energy quotient. So if you get a combination of a low C factor, in other words, they're predominantly burning carbohydrate, and a low energy quotient, you can say to yourself, this isn't good for them. They're burning primarily carbohydrate, and yet their mitochondria don't work. This could very much mean that they're a primary fat metabolizer, and that their correct diet is going to be a high fat, high protein, low carbohydrate diet. See, this probably more than anything else. The treatment is to do that diet with no other changes, and in 2 to 3 weeks, repeat the test. And I could tell you plenty of stories with people who have very poor mitochondrial function on the wrong diet. I put them on the right diet. In 2 weeks, they've doubled their mitochondria output simply by finding the right diet for themselves. And I know of no other way to determine that than doing this particular kind of testing. On the other hand, if they have a very high C factor, that means they're burning fat very efficiently. They're not living off carbohydrates. But they have a low EQ. That could be they need some carbohydrates. So some people out there need carbohydrates. So that's a way for me to look at them and say, you know what, here's what I want you to do. I want you to change your diet and make sure you get plenty of carbohydrates, especially in the morning for a while. Come back in a couple of weeks, I'll retest you. And if their energy quotient came up, bingo, I just figured out what they need to do for the rest of their lives. I'm determining right now how their particular mitochondrial genetics work, and this isn't going to change. So this is so important. Get on the right diet for your particular mitochondrial genetics early in the game before you find out too late you've been on the wrong diet. If they have a low CF, that means that their body's predominantly burning carbohydrates. And if their energy quotient is high, guess what? That's a great diet for them. So we're not going to complain about that. And finally, if they have a high CF and a high IQ, they're what we call metabolically flexible individuals. It doesn't kind of matter what they eat, as long as it's good food, whether it's carbohydrate-oriented or fat-oriented, their mitochondria are able to accommodate both equally well. Additional testing you would want to do is just basically check for diabetes, check for blood sugar problems, and certainly check for sleep disorders. But I find this particular thing, looking at the C factor in combination with the EQ, to be immensely helpful in determining maybe the most important part of what people ought to do in their program, and that is get on the right diet for their particular genetics.
Dr. Shallenberger, since we're, running a little bit short on time, we only have 5 more minutes, and I don't know if it's going to be advantageous to go into one more of the metrics because I think there's going to be quite a bit to discuss. I believe it's worthwhile to continue the conversation in the next webinar that we have scheduled.
Okay.
Folks, as you can imagine, there's going to be quite a few of these educational sessions that we're going to be running with Dr. Shallenberger. We didn't even have time to go through all of the metrics, and I think we could devote one specific lecture on each one of these metrics. So obviously there's going to be quite a bit of education that's going to be coming from us related to all of this, so stay tuned. What I did is I posted a link on the chat for you guys to schedule time in case you have specific questions about any of the stuff that we talked about. And obviously all of that is recorded and is going to be shared online with you guys so that it becomes accessible information. Just wanted to maybe wrap it up. Dr. Shallenberger, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. We sort of reconvene, I think, in about 2 weeks for the continuation of this lecture.
A great idea, Panos. One of the issues is this can get a little complex. So if you guys are listening to this for the first time, you think to yourself, oh my goodness, that's awfully complex stuff he's talking about. I don't know if I can put all that together. And that's absolutely true. I do remember when I was going through my cardiology rotation, and I had to look at EKGs and figure out what's going on with an EKG. It took me quite a while to figure out what all the little blips meant and everything else like that. Now, once I got it, it was fine. So don't get discouraged. As Panos says, we're going to be doing a lot of these educational things. That's not a bad idea to maybe take each one of these things, or maybe just 1 and 2, and just really go in depth with them, even with some case studies. So Panos will be sending out information when we're going to be doing more of these, and we'll see you at that point. And we're always recording them, so if you miss them for some reason, you'll be able to get back into them.
100%. Getting questions about whether people will be able to listen to the webinar afterwards. Yes, as we mentioned, everything has been recorded and everything is going to be shared with you guys. So you don't have to worry about not being able to attend one of these webinars, or whether you missed a little bit of today's webinar. Everything is being recorded. It's very valuable information, needs to exist somewhere so that you guys can maybe go and refresh your memory down the road. And then another point that I really want to stress out is, part of the work that we put in this partnership is tabulating and codifying all of that logic so that it exists in the specifically created report for Dr. Shallenberger. So again, we're not expecting everyone to be able to run all of these calculations on their own and be able to arrive to the insights that Dr. Shallenberger does on his own, having cumulative experience of 50+ years. we actually codified everything into our backend so that through the Shallenberger report, you can get the gist of it and you can get the end result. But as we always encourage our users to do, and that's why we're doing these webinars, it's very, very important to be 100% aware of what is happening under the hood, how these calculations are being conducted, what is the rationale behind them, what is the science behind them, and ultimately be able to have full agency over the report, even if PNOE actually does the legwork for you. But just want to highlight that we actually do the legwork for you, because otherwise it will become impractical for the average person to adopt this whole array of testing and analysis that Dr. Shallenberger has been describing. So again, Dr. Shallenberger, it was an honor and a truly big excitement to have you here in this first of many webinars. And thank you everyone for joining, and I'll see everyone next time.
Very good. So long.
Thanks. Yeah.